I think the time is of essence, so I shall begin immediately. Last time when we interacted here in the festival, it was a little more span of time, and Bibekda and I discussed the Puranas in general. Now, my problem today is that our time begins now. It started clicking. So, is Kshanay Kshanay and Navatam Upaiti Tadeva Rupam Ramaniyataya. I expect you to shed some new, fresh light on the Puranas. But my problem is that I will keep my mouth shut after this initial introduction. There is an old saying, Ashtadash Puraneshu Vyasasya Vachanadvayam. Papai, Parpidanaye, Paropkar, Punyay. If this is all there is to Puran, why should there be Ashtadash Puranas? And if we have Ashtadash Puranas, why the categorization of Mahapuranas and the Sattvic Puranas and the lesser Puranas and the Puranas which deal with avatars and so on? And in that context, why Brahma Purana?
Thank you, Pushpesh Ji, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, JLF, for having invited me here. Pushpesh Ji, sometimes you are wrong. We do not even have 20 minutes. We have about 14 minutes now to try and explain what 400,000 shlokas contain. So I suggest we do it in 3 parts, given the limited amount of time we have. First, let me quickly say a few things about the Puranas. Secondly, let me explain a little bit about why I am here. And thirdly, let me talk specifically about the Brahma Purana. The Itihas Purana corpus is collectively referred to as Pancham Veda. The Itihasa expression usually refers to the Mahabharata and the Valmiki Ramayana. According to belief, after composing the Mahabharata, Krishna Dvaipayan Veda Vyasa composed 18 Mahapuranas, or major Puranas. According to popular belief, these Puranas were composed after he composed the Mahabharata. I don't think that's quite correct, because they probably evolved in parallel. Because in the Mahabharata, you will find references to Shukadeva having died, yet Shukadeva is the narrator of more than one Purana. So these probably evolved in parallel, and today it is impossible to try and date the antecedents in any particular way. The list of the 18 Mahapuranas is more or less consistent throughout the country. There are minor Puranas or Upapuranas. Those lists vary from one part of the country to another. But I'm talking about the Mahapuranas. Earlier I translated, as some of you may know, Pushpesh Ji I think mentioned it, the Mahabharata, which is the third translation of the Mahabharata ever done in English. The earlier 2 were done in the 19th century. And then, of course, I did the Valmiki Ramayana, and then I did the Harivansha. The Puranas are encyclopedias of knowledge. We normally are exposed to very dumbed down versions of the Puranas. Extremely dumbed down. The Mahabharata in unabridged form in English has been translated thrice, the Valmiki Ramayana 5 times, the 18 Mahapuranas almost never, with the exception of the Bhagavad Purana, which of course is the most popular Purana. Many of the other Puranas have not been translated into English, at least not in unabridged form. The Mahabharata is perceived to have 100,000 shlokas. The translation that I did, of course, was based on the critical edition published by Bhandarkar, And in English language, it translated into about 2.25 million words in 10 volumes. The Puranas, I just said, amount to 400,000 shlokas. So collectively, the Puranas will amount to upwards of 12 million shlokas. I earlier said, I will explain why I'm here. The reason I am here is after translating the Mahabharata and the Valmiki Ramayana and the Harivansha, I decided to embark on what is called the Purana Project, which involves translation of all the 18 Mahapuranas. Out of those 18 Mahapuranas, 6 have been completed, 4 have already been published by Penguin. The ones that have all the translations are published by Penguin. The ones that have been already published, and some of them are in multiple volumes, are Bhagavad Purana, Markandeya Purana, Brahma Purana, and Vishnu Purana. The 2 that are awaiting publication in the course of calendar year 2023 are the Shiva Purana and the Brahmanda Purana. I am now working on the Matsya Purana. The Puranas, stated very simply, are supposed to exhibit 5 characteristics of Pancha Lakshana. These 5 characteristics are the origin of the Devas and Rishis. Contrary to what we sometimes think, I don't have the time to explain the notion of time. Manvantara, contrary to our impressions, every Manvantara, the Devas and the Rishis and the title of Indra, they change. So the first characteristic a Purana must have is a description of the origin and the lineage of the Devas and Rishis. Secondly, it must describe the original creation and the final dissolution, called Sarga. Within that original cycle of creation and dissolution, there are subsidiary cycles of creation and destruction. Those are known as Pratisarga. It must also describe the various Manvantvaras, and it must describe finally the history of the Surya Vansha and the Chandra Vansha. This is what each Purana is supposed to have. The Purana that only sticks to this and has nothing more is the Vishnu Purana. Otherwise, all the Puranas, as I said, are encyclopedias. They transcend these 5 Panchalakshanas, and many of the practices we continuously practice are based on these Puranas, whether we realize it or not. The Brahma Purana is described in the list of 18 Puranas as the Adi Purana, first Purana. It will be the first in the list. Each Purana, sometimes people find the Puranas, at least in unabridged form, somewhat boring. The same stories are being repeated. But each Purana has a certain value addition, something that's new. So what are the 4 things that are new, particularly in the Brahma Purana? Very quickly. One is, it has extensive discussions of Surya or Aditya. 108 names of Aditya, where will I get them? I will get them in the Brahma Purana. Secondly, all of us have some idea about Sankhya and Yoga. There is an extensive discussion between the sage Vasishtha and Janaka. Janaka is an entire lineage of kings. It is not simply the father of Sita. There is an extensive discussion on Sankhya and Yoga between Rishi Vasishtha and Karala Janaka. So that's the second. The third unique feature is that there is a lot about Orissa. All of us are familiar with Ratha Yatra. Ratha Yatra, where are those practices described? How did it originate? All of those are in the Brahma Purana. And finally, the Brahma Purana has the characteristics of what is called a Sthala Mahatya. It describes the greatness of Tirthas. And there is an extensive second segment of the Brahma Purana, which is called the Godavari Mahatya, which is an extensive description of all the Tirthas that are along Godavari. The Godavari is also referred to as the Gautami Ganga. It is the southern Ganga. So these are the 4 additional features in the Brahma Purana.
If I can squeeze in one question and one response, perhaps the 5-minute time limit will still be there. Bhagavad Purana is recited as a ritual mostly, and Garuda Purana is recited when somebody is dying with very scary pictures of purgatory and so on, and the transition of the soul. Some people would say, some other Purana can be recited, one to scare the person on his deathbed, or maybe to have a catharsis. The other one is as a ritual which gets you some punya. You don't have to dip into the encyclopedia. But when you come to Brahma Purana, and you mentioned the Sthala Mahima, there are others like the Skanda Purana which talks of Kurmanchal. So would there be the sacred geography, which Danayak would say, being the earlier preconceived in the Puranas? So they give us a fair idea of the expansion of the Indic civilization.
Okay, there's a question I ducked earlier because I think it's somewhat artificial. So let me quickly dispose of that. There is an artificial differentiation of the 18 Puranas according to whether there are Satya, Rajas or Tamas. According to whether Brahma predominates meaning creation predominates, whether Shiva predominates or whether Vishnu predominates. But this is largely an artificial construct because all three figure in all Puranas. Each Purana has a certain new angle. The Garuda Purana, as Pushpesh just said, has extensive sections on Sraddhas. The Matsya Purana has extensive sections on temple architecture. We construct temples in a certain way. Where is the bulk of that? The bulk of that is in Matsya Purana. When we have images of divinities, where are those? They are there primarily, not exclusively, they are primarily there in Agni Purana. Now, so far as these Puranas were composed, Veda Vyasa, by the way, is a title because every Dwapara Yuga, there is a Veda Vyasa who comes along, collates the Vedas. This particular Veda Vyasa's name was Krishna Dvaipayan. Krishna because he was dark, Dvaipayan because he was born on an island or a deepa. And we are actually in the 28th Dwapara Yuga now of the cycle of Yugas. Today we do not know whether he compiled an original Puran Samhita, which in the process of oral transmission got embellished in different parts of the country. It's fairly obvious that in their present form, these particular Puranas, as they exist today, they were composed in different parts of the country. So therefore, they have a certain geographical emphasis on a certain part of the country. The Brahma Purana, which is the Purana we are talking about, quite clearly was composed or embellished upon along the coastal areas, the southern coastal areas, Andhra and Orissa. Gautama Rishi's ashrama is actually on the banks of the Godavari even today in Rajamundri. You mentioned the Bhagavad Purana. Yes, it is recited all the time, but the entire Bhagavad Purana is not recited. Primarily what is recited is the 10th skanda. Bhagavad Purana is probably the Purana we know most. Other than the Bhagavad Purana, in generally, the Purana knowledge is in the form of very dumbed down versions, in the form of comics, reduced to television programs. But as I said, all the Puranas, including the Brahma Purana, it's an enormous corpus of knowledge, Pancham Veda.
I don't think the time allows us the luxury to get questions from the floor. What remains to be done is for me to thank Bibek Da very warmly and suggest to all of you that the book is available in the festival bookshop. So for the distilled essence of the wisdom which he has worked so hard on for years can be acquired immediately. Maybe one last word you could close the session with. Which Puran would you like them to begin with?
Impossible question to answer. By the way, I said that collectively the Puranas amount to 400,000 shlokas. The longest one is the Skanda Purana, which Pushpesh mentioned, which is huge, 85,000 shlokas. It's more or less the size of the Mahabharata. I would say that if one is going to start with a Purana, probably one should start with the Bhagavad Purana, or alternatively the Markandeya Purana. The reason I'm saying this is most stories about Vishnu, one is familiar with. One is familiar with sometimes the 25 or 26 principles of Sankhya. Anything that has to do with Shiva and the 36 tattvas of Shiva, normally we do not know. So therefore any Purana connected with Shiva is much more difficult to understand. And Markandeya Purana, because it has extensive sections on Devi, again we are probably familiar with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.